Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a champion in WWE. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of noise and light, a roaring, chaotic sea that threatened to drown him. It was the only thing Izuku Midoriya could process. Not the searing pain in his right shoulder, not the coppery taste of blood on his split lip, and certainly not the impossible reality of the moment. Just the noise. It was a physical force, a tidal wave of human emotion that washed over the ring, vibrated through the canvas, and shook the very bones in his exhausted body. He was on his knees. The green and black of his ring gear was dark with sweat, clinging to him like a second skin. His vision swam, a kaleidoscope of blinding white spotlights and the 10,000 shifting colors of the crowd and the rafters of the Musutaka Dome. He had just executed the single most perfect Detroit smash of his life. It wasn't born of strategy or careful planning. It was an act of pure, desperate instinct. A final, explosive surge from a well that should have run dry 20 minutes ago. He had watched his opponent, the titan of a champion, a man who had held the WWE World Heavyweight Championship for 384 dominant days, get hoisted onto his shoulders. He remembered the strain, the scream of every overtaxed muscle. He remembered the dizzying rotation of the sit-out power bomb, the earth-shattering impact that sent a shockwave through the entire ring structure. And then the pin. 1. The roar of the crowd was a hopeful gasp, a collective intake of breath. 2. The sound pitched higher, a shriek of disbelief and fervent prayer. 3. The bell. The clang of the ring bell was a sharp, clear note that cut through the cacophony. It was a period at the end of an impossible sentence. It was the sound of finality. It was the sound of a new beginning. Izuku's head was still down, his messy green hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't dare look up. It couldn't be real. This was a dream, a fantasy cooked up by the same lonely, quirkless boy who used to watch All Might's legendary Hero-Mania matches on a tiny, flickering screen, filling notebooks with frantic analysis of moves he could never hope to perform. Champions were giants. They were chosen ones. They were Katsuki Bakugo. They weren't him. A hand landed gently on his shoulder. It was the referee, his face a mixture of professional calm and genuine astonishment. "Son," he said, his voice barely audible over the din. "It's yours." Slowly, hesitantly, Izuku lifted his head. The referee was holding it. The belt. It was more beautiful and more intimidating than he had ever imagined. 10 pounds of solid gold, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the frantic dance of the overhead lights. The central plate was a massive, stylized W, encrusted with what looked like 1,000 tiny diamonds. But it was the custom side plates that made his breath catch in his throat. On the left, a stylized silhouette of his mentor, All Might, in his prime. On the right, the emblem he had chosen for himself, a stylized rabbit's head, its ears forming a subtle V for victory, with the words, "One for all," etched beneath it. It was the symbol of his fanbase, the name they had given themselves, a testament to the idea that his strength came from all of them. The referee extended it to him. Izuku's hands trembled as he reached out. His fingers, scraped raw from the canvas, brushed against the cold, heavy metal. The moment he took its full weight into his hands, a sob tore itself from his throat. This was the weight of a dream. The weight of a promise. The weight of gold. He collapsed forward, pressing his forehead against the cool leather of the strap, the championship cradled in his arms like a newborn. The tears he had been holding back for what felt like his entire life finally broke free, hot and fast. He cried for the boy who was told he could never do it. He cried for his mother, who must be watching at home, surely crying right along with him. He cried out of sheer, overwhelming, painful joy. The crowd's roar didn't subside. It changed. It swelled into a chant. DKU! 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 The name they had given him. The name Bakugo had once used to mock him, to call him useless. The fans had taken it and turned it into a war cry. They had made it his. His gaze flickered up, past the ropes, into the endless ocean of people. He saw them. Thousands of homemade signs. Deku, the symbol of the ring. Plus Ultra Champion! And then he saw it, a small boy, no older than 10, sitting on his father's shoulders. He was wearing a green, Deku, t-shirt and holding a tiny, hand-drawn version of the championship belt, his face painted with pure, unadulterated adoration. In that boy's eyes, Izuku saw himself. The sight sent a jolt of electricity through him, stronger than any wrestling move. This was why he did it. For that look. For that feeling. To show that boy, and every other person who ever felt small or worthless, that anything was possible. With a surge of adrenaline, he pushed himself to his feet. He staggered to the nearest turnbuckle, the heavy belt clutched in one hand. He climbed the ropes, his legs shaking violently, and raised the championship high above his head. The resulting explosion of sound was deafening. It was the sound of a story reaching its climax. The underdog had won. The impossible had happened. As if on cue, confetti cannons lining the arena erupted. A blizzard of green and silver streamers rained down from the heavens, shimmering in the spotlights, blanketing the ring in a sea of celebration. Izuku stood there, the gold on his shoulder, the tears on his face, the roar of the world in his ears, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The walk from the grand stage of the Muzidafu Dome to the backstage area was like stepping between worlds. One moment, he was the epicenter of a universe of 60,000 screaming fans. The next, he was in a narrow, brightly lit corridor, the roar instantly muffled to a distant hum behind the heavy curtain of the gorilla position. The transition was jarring. The air here smelled different, less like popcorn and pyrotechnics, more like sweat, athletic tape, and stale coffee. Technicians in headsets rushed past, their faces grim with focus. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines. This was the factory floor where the magic was made, and the spell of the arena was broken the moment you stepped through the curtain. But tonight, the factory floor had paused its work. As Izuku emerged, leaning heavily on a production assistant, the small, crowded space erupted in applause. It wasn't the roar of the crowd, it was the heartfelt, respectful applause of his peers. Wrestlers he admired, men and women who put their bodies on the line every single night, were all there. Ida, Ingenium, Tenya, ever formal, stood ramrod straight, clapping with a precision that was almost militaristic, a proud, stoic smile on his face. Tsuyu Ajiri gave him a small, genuine smile and a thumbs up. Even some of the grizzled veterans, men who had seen dozens of champions come and go, were nodding their approval. Before he could even process it, a blur of pink and brown slammed into him. You did it! Izuku, you actually did it! Achiko Uraraka wrapped her arms around his neck, squeezing with a strength that belied her size. Her own women's division match had been earlier in the night, and she was out of her Uravity ring gear, dressed in a simple WWE hoodie and jeans. He could feel her laughing, a joyful, bubbling sound right next to his ear. He hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder for a moment, the familiar scent of her cherry blossom shampoo a grounding anchor in the dizzying chaos. I can't believe it! He mumbled into her hoodie. She pulled back, her hands on his shoulders, her round face beaming. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears of happiness. Believe it! I told you if you could just survive his opening storm, your heart would be too much for him in the end. I watched from the monitor back here. We all did, when the ref's hand hit 3. Izuku, this place went crazy. We are exceptionally proud of your performance, Midoriya. Ida added, stepping forward. He adjusted his glasses, though they were already perfectly in place. You represented the spirit of this company with tenacity and honor. A truly plus-ultra championship victory. Izuku managed a weak, watery smile. Thanks, guys. It means a lot. He looked down at the belt, which he was still clutching to his chest like a life raft. It felt even heavier now. A path cleared through the assembled wrestlers. At the end of it stood a tall, skeletal figure in a sharp yellow suit. His blonde hair fell in 2 distinct, lanky bangs around a face that was more skull than flesh, his blue eyes sunken into dark, shadowed sockets. To the outside world, he was Toshinori Yagi, the shrewd general manager of the Raw is Plus Ultra brand. To Izuku, he was, and always would be, All Might. The scattered applause died down as All Might approached. He didn't smile, not at first. His gaze was intense, scanning Izuku from head to toe, taking in the bruises already starting to form, the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, and finally, the golden championship in his arms. He stopped in front of Izuku. The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. Then, the corner of All Might's thin lips curled upwards into a rare, wide smile that seemed to light up his entire gaunt face. "You did it, my boy," he said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that still held the echo of his former power. He placed a large, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder, the same one that wasn't throbbing with pain. "You really did it." Izuku's own smile faltered, his lower lip trembling again. "All Might." No need for words," All Might interrupted gently. "Your actions in that ring spoke volumes. They told a story that will be remembered for a very, very long time." He squeezed Izuku's shoulder. "I am so proud of you." Hearing those words from his idol, his mentor, the man who had seen potential in him when no one else had, was more overwhelming than the roar of the 60,000 fans. It was the ultimate validation. The tears started welling up again. But then, All Might's expression shifted. The warm pride was replaced by a familiar, stern gravity. The smile faded, and the look in his eyes became that of a seasoned general, not a proud father. "But listen to me, young Midoriya," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Listen very carefully. Winning this," he tapped a long finger against the gold plate of the championship, "is the hardest thing you've ever done. But it's not the work. It's the end of the beginning. It's the qualification for the real fight." Izuku blinked, confused. "The real fight? Climbing the mountain is brutal," All Might explained, his gaze unwavering. "It takes everything you have. But you're on the summit now, and every single person in that locker room, every hungry wolf and every rival promotion, every shark in every boardroom is now looking up at you, staying on top of the mountain, with the whole world trying to pull you down. That is the real work. And it begins now." He leaned in closer, his voice a near whisper. "That belt doesn't just make you a champion. It makes you a target. The biggest target in this entire industry. Never forget that." With a final, firm pat on the shoulder, All Might straightened up. "Get to medical, get yourself checked out. Then ice everything. You have the post-show press conference in 30 minutes. He turned and walked away, his tall frame disappearing into the labyrinthine backstage corridors, leaving Izuku standing there with Achiko and Ida. The joy of the moment hadn't vanished, but it was now tempered by a cold, sobering reality. All Might's words echoed in his head. The biggest target in this entire industry. He looked down at the championship again. The gold no longer just shimmered with the light of victory. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hallway, it seemed to gleam with a predatory light, a heavy, golden bullseye. The weight in his hands suddenly felt immense, a crushing pressure that had nothing to do with its 10 pounds of metal and leather. It was the weight of expectation. The weight of a crown. "He's right, you know," Achiko said softly, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. "But he's also not." Izuku looked at her, a question in his eyes. "You're a target now, sure," she continued, her expression firm and supportive. "But you're not alone on that mountaintop, Izuku. You never have been." She gestured to Ida, to the other wrestlers who were now giving him a respectful distance, and then, implicitly, to herself. A small, genuine smile returned to Izuku's face. The pressure didn't disappear, but it felt manageable. "Right." He nodded, his voice gaining a sliver of its strength back. "Right. Medical." Then the press conference. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and started the slow, painful walk toward the trainer's room. Every step sent a fresh ache through his body, a reminder of the brutal war he had just endured. But as he walked, he held the championship not clutched to his chest in fear, but carried firmly at his side. It was a burden, yes. But it was his burden to carry. 30 minutes, a bag of ice on his shoulder, and a hurried checkup from the WWE medical staff later, Izuku found himself in a place that felt more foreign and terrifying than a steel cage match. A press conference. He stood awkwardly behind a curtain, waiting for his introduction. He had traded his torn and sweaty ring gear for a standard-issue WWE champion track jacket, zipped up to his chin, and a pair of black athletic pants. He felt underdressed and overwhelmed. The low murmur of dozens of reporters and the constant, rhythmic click-click-click of camera shutters was a nervous, irritating sound, a world away from the unified roar of the fans. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a PR woman's voice announced from the podium. Please welcome the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion, Deku Izuku Midoriya. A polite smattering of applause greeted him as he pushed through the curtain and walked toward the long table at the front of the room, a branded backdrop with the Clash at the Academy logo and dozens of sponsor names stretched behind it. The lights were just as bright as in the arena, but here they felt interrogative, exposing. He squinted as dozens of camera flashes went off at once, painting his vision in spots of white. He sat down at the center of the table, placing the championship belt in front of him. The gold plate seemed to mock him with its polished perfection, a stark contrast to his own disheveled state. He could feel a fresh bruise purpling on his cheekbone, and the dull throb in his shoulder was a constant, nagging companion. Izuku, congratulations, the PR woman said with a practiced smile. We'll now open the floor to questions. Immediately, a forest of hands and microphones shot up. A man in the front row from a major sports network was first. Izuku, congratulations. An incredible victory tonight. You were the 15-1 underdog. Take us through those final moments. What was going through your mind when you hoisted the champion up for that final Detroit smash? Izuku leaned toward the microphone, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. Thank you, he began, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. Honestly, I wasn't thinking much of anything. It was just instinct. My body was screaming at me to quit. He'd hit me with everything. But I could hear the fans. And I just thought, one more. I just have to give it one more shot. For them. He felt his face flush, worried he sounded lame. Another reporter, a woman from a popular wrestling blog, was next. Deku, your entire journey to this title has been defined by your never-give-up attitude. Now that you're here, at the top, how does that motto change? What's the goal now that you've achieved the ultimate dream? He mulled that over. All Might's words were fresh in his mind. The goal doesn't change, he said, a little more confidently this time. It just gets bigger. It's not just about me not giving up anymore. It's about proving that this symbol. He patted the belt. Stands for that idea. That anyone, no matter where they start, no matter what people tell them, can get here if they work hard enough and have people who believe in them. I want to be a champion that makes people believe, he started muttering, his classic analytical brain kicking in. It's about maintaining the symbolic integrity of the championship, while also performing at a peak athletic level, which requires a new strategic paradigm, because now I'm defending instead of chasing. So the risk-reward calculation of high-flying moves has to be re-evaluated. He trailed off, realizing he was rambling. The reporters were scribbling furiously, some with amused smirks. He ducked his head, embarrassed. Sorry. I just want to be a good champion. The questions continued. They were mostly respectful, focusing on his journey, his emotional state, his relationship with his mentor, All Might. He gave earnest, if slightly awkward answers, his sincerity cutting through his nervousness. He talked about his mom, promising to call her the second he was done. He talked about the One for All fanbase, calling them the true source of his strength. He was settling in, the terror slowly being replaced by a quiet sense of duty. Then, a reporter from a notoriously cynical tabloid got the microphone. Mr. Midoriya, let's be frank. For over a year, Katsuki Dynamite Bakugo has been the undisputed, self-proclaimed final boss of this brand. He was the heavy favorite tonight, a generational talent on a collision course with this championship. Do you feel your victory, as emotional as it was, is seen by some in the locker room as a fluke? That you've essentially just jumped the line and stolen what was rightfully his? The air in the room instantly chilled. The question hung there, sharp and poisoned. Izuku's back stiffened. He knew this was coming. He had been dreading it. He chose his words carefully. Every match in that ring is earned. The former champion was a great champion. He was tough, one of the toughest I've ever faced. But tonight I was better, for 3 seconds. That's all it takes. As for Kakin, he paused, using the childhood nickname by accident before correcting himself. As for Bakugo, he's an amazing competitor. One of the best in the world. His time will come, I have no doubt. But tonight was my time. It was a good, diplomatic answer. A champion's answer. But the champion he was talking about had other ideas. Slam! The double doors at the back of the press room flew open, hitting the walls with a crack like a gunshot. Every head in the room whipped around. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway, was Katsuki Bakugo. He was still in his ring gear, a complex and intimidating arrangement of black and explosive orange. His trademark gauntlet-like wristbands were off, but the scorched, sweaty state of his attire told the story of the war he'd been in just an hour prior in a #1 contenders match. His spiky ash-blonde hair was damp, and his crimson eyes were burning with a rage so pure and so intense it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. He wasn't just angry. He was a walking inferno. The reporters erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions and flashing cameras. Bakugo ignored them all. His furious gaze was locked on one person and one person only. He stalked into the room, his heavy wrestling boots thudding on the carpeted floor. The reporters scrambled out of his way, parting for him like he was a predator and they were prey. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just a straight, unswerving line of incandescent fury aimed directly at the podium. A fluke! Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl that cut through the noise. He asked if it was a goddamn fluke. He came to a stop right in front of the table, staring daggers at Izuku. He was so close Izuku could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell the lingering scent of his signature nitroglycerin-like pyro from his entrance. You're damn right it was a fluke. Bakugo spat, his eyes boring into Izuku's. Look at you. Sitting there with my belt, looking like a lost puppy someone handed a trophy to. You think you earned that? Izuku stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The fear he'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a surge of defensive adrenaline. I won the match, Kakin. You got lucky! Bakugo roared, slamming a hand down on the table, making the microphones jump. The real main event was my match. I destroyed my opponent. I proved I was the #1 contender. This entire PPV was built for me to take that title at the next show. And you wormed your way in. You and your pathetic, bleeding heart story. Handed everything by All Might since day one. That's not true. Izuku's voice was rising, matching Bakugo's intensity. All Might gave me a chance, but I earned this. I fought for it. Tonight, in that ring, I earned it. You earned nothing. Bakugo leaned over the table, his face inches from Izuku's. The raw hatred in his expression was terrifying. It was the same look he'd given Izuku in the schoolyard all those years ago, but magnified 1,000 times over. You're a charity case, Deku. A worthless, sentimental joke that the marketing department loves. You are not a champion. You are an imposter. And you are holding something that belongs to me. A tense silence fell over the room. The reporters were frozen, holding their cameras and phones up, capturing every second of the explosive confrontation. This was better than any scripted promo. This was real. It belongs to the champion, Izuku said, his voice low and steady, a core of steel suddenly present. And that's me. For a split second, something flickered in Bakugo's eyes. Surprise? Respect? It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an even deeper fury. He didn't say another word. He just acted. With a guttural roar, he shoved the table. It wasn't a small push. It was an explosive burst of power that sent the heavy table sliding into Izuku's midsection. Izuku stumbled back, gasping, as water bottles and microphones clattered to the floor. The championship belt slid off the table and hit the carpet with a heavy, muffled thud. That was the last straw. Seeing the belt on the floor, discarded, ignited something in Izuku. He shoved the table aside and lunged forward, getting right in Bakugo's face. You have no respect, Izuku seethed. For anything. I respect power. Bakugo jabbed a finger hard into Izuku's chest. And you don't have it, he shoved Izuku. Hard. Izuku staggered back a few feet, his bad shoulder screaming in protest. But he didn't fall. He squared himself, his fists clenched, his jaw set. The look in his eyes was no longer that of an awkward boy, but of a cornered animal ready to fight. They were about to come to blows right there, in the middle of the press conference, when a swarm of black-shirt security guards and WWE officials flooded into the room. Two of them grabbed Bakugo, who thrashed against them like a caged animal. Another official put a hand on Izuku's chest, holding him back. "Get your hands off me!" Bakugo bellowed, still trying to get at Izuku. "I'm going to take that damn belt off you, Deku! You hear me? It's mine!" Izuku didn't shout back. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He stared at Bakugo, his gaze a mixture of anger, hurt, and a grim, newfound resolve. The guards dragged us screaming, cursing Bakugo out of the room, the doors swinging shut behind them, finally cutting off the tirade. The press room was left in a state of utter chaos. Reporters were shouting, trying to get a final word from Izuku. Officials were speaking into headsets, their faces pale with stress, but Izuku heard none of it. His eyes were fixed on the double doors that Bakugo had disappeared through. The confrontation had been ugly, public, and deeply personal. But it had also been clarifying. All Might was right. The work was just beginning. The mountain was steep, and the first person trying to drag him down was the one who had been trying to do it his entire life. An official gently steered him away from the podium and the rabble of reporters. As he was being led out through a side door, Izuku stooped down and picked up the WWE Championship from the floor. He brushed a speck of dirt from the golden plate. The weight of it in his hands was no longer just symbolic. It was real. It was the weight of a title he had to defend. The weight of a mentor's legacy. The weight of a rival's hatred. He clutched the belt tighter. The gold was cold against his skin, a stark and heavy promise of the war to come. The celebration was over. 2 days. It had been 48 hours since the world had tilted on its axis. 48 hours since Izuku Midoriya had become the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. In that time, he had slept for a cumulative total of maybe 5 hours, his mind a relentless replay loop of the final bell, the roar of the crowd, and the venom in Katsuki Bakugo's eyes. His body was an atlas of pain, a geography of deep purple bruises and screaming muscles. His right shoulder, in particular, felt like it was held together with rusted barbed wire and spite. But as he stood behind the massive LED screen that served as the entrance tunnel for Monday Night Raw, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the low, thunderous hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It was the sound of 20,000 people packed into the Saitama Super Arena, a simmering cauldron of anticipation waiting to boil over. And tonight, he was the one holding the match. He took a deep, shaky breath, the recycled arena air cool in his lungs. He was dressed not in his ring gear, but in crisp dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and the same black champion's track jacket from the press conference. It felt like a suit of armor. Slung over his aching shoulder, its gold plates cool against the fabric, was the championship belt. The weight was a constant, profound reminder. You are the champion. Act like it. You ready, champ? A stagehand with a headset asked, giving him a supportive nod. Izuku gave a jerky nod in return, his throat suddenly as dry as desert sand. Ready. It came out as a squeak. He cleared his throat and tried again, forcing a lower register. Ready. He could hear the voices of the commentary team through the arena's PA system. The excitable, high-pitched energy of Hisashi, present Mike, Yamada and the perpetually tired, analytical drawl of Shota, Eraserhead, Aizawa. What a night we have for you folks! Mick's voice boomed. The fallout from Clash at the Academy is still settling, but tonight, for the first time ever, the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion Deku is in the house. A roar went through the arena at the mention of his name, and the hum behind the screen intensified. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. It's illogical to put this much pressure on a rookie champion so soon after the biggest win of his career, Aizawa grumbled. He's walking into the lion's den with a stake tied around his neck. Oh, come on, Eraser! This is his moment. His coronation! On the other side of the screen, the arena lights dimmed. The massive Titantron above the ring flickered to life, showing a highlight package of his victory, the grueling match, the desperate struggle, the final, tide-turning Detroit smash, the referee's hand hitting the mat for the 3 count. The sight of it, professionally produced with dramatic music, still seemed like a scene from someone else's life. Then, the opening chords of his entrance music hit. It was an explosive, upbeat rock anthem filled with triumphant horns and a driving drum beat, a song designed to inspire hope. The crowd erupted. It was a sound he was used to, but this time it was different. It wasn't the hopeful cheer for the underdog. It was the deafening ovation for the man. The LED screen slid open, bathing him in a blinding river of white and green light. He flinched, then forced himself to step forward, into the fire. The sheer wall of noise hit him first, a physical pressure against his skin. The light came next, a dizzying sea of spotlights and thousands of cell phone flashes creating a galaxy of stars just for him. He walked onto the ramp, his eyes wide as he scanned the crowd. It was a sea of green. Green shirts, green signs, green foam fists. It was the one for all fanbase, in full force. He forced a smile, raising a hand to wave. The roar intensified. As he walked down the long ramp, he made a point of making eye contact with the fans lining the barricade, slapping their outstretched hands. A young girl in a homemade Deku costume held up a sign that read, "You're our hero!" He gave her a specific nod and a wider smile, and her face lit up with a joy so pure it momentarily washed away all his anxiety. This is why, he reminded himself. This is for them. He reached the ring, rolling under the bottom rope with a practiced fluidity that belied the agony in his shoulder. He walked to the center of the ring, a microphone already waiting for him on a stand. Slowly, reverently, he unslung the championship from his shoulder. He held it up for each side of the arena to see, the polished gold glinting under the lights. The crowd noise reached a fever pitch. He had seen countless champions do this very ritual, and now it was his turn. It felt surreal, sacred. He took the microphone from the stand, his hand trembling slightly. The chant began, low at first, then swelling to fill the entire building. DKU! 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 He waited, letting it wash over him, a goofy, teary-eyed smile spreading across his face. He felt like the luckiest person on the planet. Finally, he raised the mic to his lips. "Saitama!" he yelled, and the crowd roared back. 2 nights ago, I did something that a lot of people told me was impossible. That even I thought was impossible." He paused, looking down at the belt he had placed on his shoulder again. "For my whole life, I've been a fan. I've sat right where you are, and I've watched my heroes stand in this ring, holding this championship. I watched the passion of All Might, the technical genius of Sir Night Eye, the fire of endeavor, and I dreamed. But that's all it was. A dream." His voice cracked with emotion, but he pushed on. "But then, you guys," he gestured to the entire arena. "The one for all fanbase, you started believing in me. And All Might, my mentor, he believed in me, and slowly, you taught me how to believe in myself. So this championship, it's not mine." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "It's OURS!" he shouted, his voice filled with passion. The murmur turned into another colossal cheer. "This belt represents every single person who has ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, or smart enough. It represents the dreamers, and I promise you, I will pour my entire heart and soul into defending it, for all of us." It was heartfelt. It was genuine. It was pure Deku. The crowd was eating it up, their chants of his name shaking the rafters. He was finally starting to feel like he belonged, and then, the screen flickered. The celebratory green graphics on the Titantron were replaced by a sudden, jarring burst of static. The upbeat entrance music cut out, plunging the arena into an eerie, expectant silence. A low, distorted feedback whine filled the air. Izuka looked up at the screen, confused. On the commentary table, Present Mike was equally baffled. Folks, we seem to be having some technical difficulties here." The static coalesced into an image. It was a shaky, handheld camera feed, pointing at a figure in the middle of a dingy, hardcore-looking gym. The walls were unpainted concrete, covered in chalk marks and dents. Heavy chains were draped over squat racks, and the floor was littered with massive, oversized dumbbells. It was a place of pain and punishment, a stark contrast to the glitzy WWE arena. In the center of it all was Katsuki Bakugo. He was shirtless, glistening with sweat. His fists were wrapped in black athletic tape, and he was methodically, brutally, punching a heavy bag that looked like it was filled with cement. Each impact was a sickening thud that echoed through the arena's sound system. He didn't look at the camera. He just kept punching, his face a mask of controlled fury. The crowd, which had been cheering moments before, was now a chorus of boos. Finally, after one last, explosive punch that sent the heavy bag groaning on its chain, Bakugo stopped. He turned his head slowly, his crimson eyes finding the lens of the camera as if he could see right through it, right into the ring, right at Izuku. A charity case, he began, his voice a low, gravelly snarl. He spat on the concrete floor. That's what you are, Deku, standing in the middle of my ring, with my championship, spewing that feel-good, Hallmark card garbage about our belt. He started pacing in front of the camera like a caged tiger. You talk about dreams. You talk about believing. Let me tell you what I believe in. He stopped and kicked a 100-pound dumbbell, sending it scraping across the floor with a screech of metal on concrete. I believe in power. I believe in victory. I believe that the strongest man gets the prize, and that prize, he pointed a taped thumb at his own chest, was supposed to be mine. The boos grew louder, but Bakugo just smirked, a cruel, arrogant twist of his lips. You think those idiots chanting your name make you a champion? You think All Might holding your hand and clearing the path for you makes you a champion? You are a paper champion, Deku. A placeholder. A marketing gimmick. You are the symbol of hope for all the worthless, pathetic extras who need a participation trophy to feel good about themselves. In the ring, Izuku's face had hardened. His knuckles were white where he gripped the microphone. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to hit him where he was most insecure. Bakugo leaned in close to the camera, his red eyes burning with intensity. So you enjoy your little fantasy for now. Wave to the kids. Sign the autographs. Hold that gold up high, but know this, I'm coming for it. I am the one contender, and All Might, your washed-up hero of a general manager, can't protect you from that. There will be a match, and when there is, I'm not just going to take my championship. I'm going to break you. I'm going to expose you for the fraud you are, and I'm going to end this pathetic little fairy tale, once and for all. The screen went black. For a moment, the arena was silent, stunned by the sheer venom of the promo. Then, a unified chant rose up, louder and more defiant than before. BKUGO sucks! BKUGO sucks! Izuku stood frozen in the center of the ring, the microphone held loosely in his hand. He had faced Bakugo's anger his whole life, but this was different. This wasn't just a schoolyard bully. This was a rival who had declared war on a global stage. The weight on his shoulders suddenly felt 100 pounds heavier. He had made his promise to the fans, but Bakugo had just made a promise of his own. And Izuku knew, with a chilling certainty, that Kaken always kept his promises. The adrenaline from the opening segment and Bakugo's venomous interruption carried Izuku through the first hour of the show. He was ushered back to his private locker room, a privilege reserved for top champions, and tried to focus. But his mind was a whirlwind. His locker room wasn't grand, but it was a world away from the communal changing rooms he had used for his entire career. It had its own shower, a small sofa, and a television monitor showing the live feed of the show. On a small table, a platter of fruit and bottled water sat untouched. The door had a golden star on it with his ring name, Deku. It was all so new, so surreal. He paced the small room, his champion's jacket discarded on the sofa, revealing the plain gray t-shirt underneath. The championship belt lay on the cushion, its gold gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It felt like a silent, judging observer. He stopped pacing and looked at the monitor. Two mid-card wrestlers were having a solid, technical match, but he wasn't watching them. His gaze was distant, his mind elsewhere. A paper champion, a fraud. I'm going to break you. Bakugo's words were on a loop, each repetition chipping away at the confidence he had felt in the ring. Was he right? Was this all a fluke? He had won, yes, but the former champion had been at the end of a long, grueling reign. Was Izuku just the beneficiary of good timing? His muttering started, a low, unconscious habit from his youth. He's right about the pressure. His offensive style is predicated on overwhelming an opponent in the first 5 minutes. If I can't weather that initial storm, my own strategy falls apart. His howitzer impact has a 90% success rate when his opponent is already fatigued. I need to work on my stamina, my core endurance, maybe adjust my diet to build more explosive short-burst recovery. But what if he's right about the psychology? What if I am just a gimmick? The fans believe in the story, but can I live up to it? The physical toll is one thing, but the mental pressure. He ran a hand through his messy green hair, his anxiety coiling in his gut like a snake. He felt the familiar, crushing weight of inadequacy settling over him. He wasn't a champion. He was just Izuku Midoriya in a champion's jacket. He crossed the room to his gear bag and pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook. It was Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. The cover was soft and bent from years of use. He flipped it open to a section near the back, the pages filled with his cramped, frantic scrawl. The heading, written in bold red ink, was Kaken. The pages were a dizzying array of diagrams, statistics, and observations. He had been studying Bakugo for years, first as a childhood obsession, then as a rival in the WWE Performance Center, and now as his inevitable challenger. He had broken down every match Bakugo had wrestled on the main roster. Tendency to lead with a stiff right kick to the ribs to test an opponent's guard. Explosive lariat has a slight tell. He flares his nostrils a split second before launching. Vulnerable to quick, counter-based attacks after his AP shot flurry, as his stance is too wide for immediate defensive pivots. He sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, the notebook open in his lap. He clicked a pen and started adding new notes from Bakugo's brief appearance on the heavy bag. Stance is more grounded than before, generating more power from his hips, less from his shoulders. Potential shift in fighting style? Or just for show? Need more data. He was so lost in his own world of analysis and anxiety that he didn't hear the gentle knock on the door. He didn't hear it open. Still trying to save the world with a pen and paper? Izuku jumped, the notebook sliding off his lap. He looked up to see Achiko Uraraka leaning against the doorframe, a warm, knowing smile on her face. She was in her own ring gear, the familiar pink and black Uravity outfit, ready for her match later in the night. Achiko! I didn't hear you. He stammered, scrambling to his feet. I know, she said, walking into the room. Her smile softened as she took in the scene. The pacing marks on the floor, the discarded jacket, the open notebook filled with frantic scribbles. Her gaze landed on him, and she saw the exhaustion and worry in his eyes. You were in the zone. Though no, the world is ending, I must analyze it to death zone. He couldn't help a small, weak smile. He just got in my head, that's all. Of course he did, she said, her tone practical. That's his whole thing. He's a hand grenade with a microphone. You're a sponge. He pulls the pin, you soak up all the shrapnel. She walked over and sat on the sofa, patting the cushion next to her. Come on. Sit. Breathe. He hesitated, then sighed and sat down beside her. He felt like a little kid being told to take a timeout. You know what your problem is, Izuku? She asked, nudging his arm gently. I have a list if you want to see it. He muttered, gesturing to his notebook. She laughed, a light, airy sound that seemed to cut through the tension in the room. No, your real problem. You're forgetting to have fun. He blinked at her. Fun? Achiko, I have my first title defense tonight. Bakugo just declared war on national television. The entire world is watching me, waiting for me to fail. I don't think fun is in the equation right now. It has to be, she insisted, her expression turning serious, though her eyes remained kind. Why did you start doing this? Why did you go through all those years of brutal training at the Performance Center? Was it so you could sit in a quiet room and worry yourself sick about statistics? No, you did it because you love it, she finished for him. You did it because flying through the air to hit a hurricane rana feels amazing. You did it for that moment when you connect with the crowd and you all feel the same thing at once. You did it because, deep down, it's the most fun you've ever had in your life. She was right. Of course she was right. Beneath the pressure and the pain, the core of it was love. A pure, unadulterated love for the art of professional wrestling. "You're carrying that," she said, pointing to the belt. "And it's heavy. All Might gave you the speech, I'm sure. The weight of the world, blah blah blah." She did a funny, gravelly impression of their mentor's serious voice, which made Izuku snort with laughter. "But you can't carry it if you're crushed by it. You have to remember to stand up straight and enjoy the view from the top of the mountain. Otherwise, what's the point of climbing it?" He looked at her, his friend, his confidant, the one person who could always see through his frantic energy to the scared kid underneath. She wasn't offering him strategy or analysis. She was offering him perspective. She was reminding him to breathe. "You're right," he said softly, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all day. I'm overthinking it." "You're always overthinking it," she teased. "Now, who do you have tonight?" "Monoma," Achiko groaned theatrically. "Oh, not him. He's the worst. He's going to spend 20 minutes doing a bad impression of you and telling the crowd how much better he is at it." "That's what my notes say," Izuku admitted. "Then stop taking notes and just go out there and punch him in his stupid, smug face," she said with a grin. "And when you do, try to enjoy it." She stood up, stretching her arms above her head. "My match is next. Gotta go. Don't get lost in that notebook again, okay? And hey." She paused at the door, her expression turning fierce and loyal. "For what it's worth, you're no paper champion. You're the real deal. Now go prove it." She winked and then she was gone, leaving him alone in the quiet locker room. He looked from the closed door to the championship belt on the sofa. He thought about her words. Try to enjoy it. Slowly, a real, genuine smile spread across his face. The anxiety hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt like a crushing weight. It was just background noise. He had a job to do. A promise to keep. A title to defend. And maybe, just maybe, he could have a little fun while doing it. The main event. The final slot of the 3-hour broadcast. The most prestigious position on the card, reserved for the biggest matches and the biggest stars. Tonight, it belonged to him. Izuku stood at the top of the ramp, his championship belt now fastened securely around his waist. The heavy gold plates felt cool and solid against his gear. The crowd roared his name, their energy a palpable force that flowed into him, chasing away the last of his earlier anxieties. He wasn't just Izuku anymore. He was Deku, the WWE champion, and he was about to go to work. His opponent was already in the ring, preening for the crowd. Nito Monoma. Monoma was the physical embodiment of arrogance. With slicked back blonde hair and a condescending smirk that never left his face, his entire gimmick was that of a master mocker. He was a solid, technically sound wrestler, but his greatest weapon was his ability to get under his opponent's skin. His ring gear was a gaudy, glittering gold, a deliberate parody of a champion's belt. As Izuku made his way to the ring, Monoma clapped slowly, that infuriating smirk plastered on his face. He leaned against the ropes, a picture of smug confidence. And his opponent? The ring announcer's voice boomed. From Mizurufu, Japan, he is the challenger. Nito Monoma! A shower of boos rained down on Monoma, who simply spread his arms wide, basking in the negative reaction as if it were applause. And his opponent? The announcer continued, his voice rising with excitement. From Mizurufu, Japan, weighing in at 185 pounds, he is the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion. Deku Izuku Midoriya! The arena exploded. Izuku slid into the ring, his eyes locked on Monoma. He walked to the center, where the referee was waiting. He carefully unfastened the championship and handed it to the ref, who held it high for the crowd to see one last time before passing it to the timekeeper at ringside. The bell rang. This was it. His first defense. So, you're the big hero now, are you, Midoriya? Monoma sneered, circling him. The little engine that could. It's a laughable, C-list story, but I suppose the masses enjoy such drivel. Izuku ignored him, his stance low, his hands up, ready. The match began not with a furious exchange, but with a game of cat and mouse. Monoma was quick and slippery. He dodged Izuku's initial attempts to lock up, sliding out of the way and laughing. He mimicked Izuku's ready stance, doing a comically exaggerated version of it that made him look like a trembling child. "What's the matter, Symbol?" Monoma taunted. "Can't land a single hit? I thought you were supposed to be the chosen one." "Monoma's strategy is clear." Aizawa's voice drawled over the commentary. "Get inside the champion's head. Make him angry. An angry fighter is a sloppy fighter." The taunts were working. Frustration was building in Izuku. He remembered Ochiko's words, "Have fun, enjoy it," but it was hard to enjoy being made a fool of. He charged, aiming for a clothesline, but Monoma ducked under it and tripped him, sending him sprawling face first onto the canvas. Monoma then stood on the middle rope and did an imitation of Izuku's signature turnbuckle pose, mocking him to the furious crowd. This continued for several minutes. Monoma would use his technical skill to counter Izuku's offense, and then immediately follow it up with a piece of psychological warfare. He landed a few cheap shots, a thumb to the eye when the referee was obscured, a kick to the back of the knee, but his main weapon was his mouth. Finally Izuku had enough. He stopped chasing. He stood in the center of the ring, breathing deeply, calming himself. He remembered his training. He remembered his analysis. Monoma overcommits on his taunts. He leaves himself open. Seeing Izuku stand still, Monoma's smirk widened. "Giving up already, champion? I knew you didn't have the stomach for it." He ran at Izuku, planning to deliver a running kick. But this time, Izuku was ready. As Monoma lifted his leg, Izuku exploded forward, ducking under the kick and catching Monoma's other leg in a perfect dragon screw leg whip. Monoma yelped in surprise as he was twisted to the mat. The tide had turned. Now it was Izuku's turn to go on the offensive. He was faster, stronger, and more innovative. He hit Monoma with a flurry of offense, a spinning heel kick, a picture-perfect dropkick, a beautiful bridging German suplex that got a 2 count. The crowd was roaring with every move. This was the champion they had been waiting to see, but Monoma was a veteran. He was resilient. And he was smart. He saw an opening and targeted the one place he knew would be effective, Izuku's injured right shoulder. During an exchange in the corner, Monoma shoved Izuku's shoulder first into the steel ring post. Izuku cried out in pain, clutching his arm. The crowd groaned. "There it is," Aizawa said grimly. "The bullseye. Monoma is no fool. He's taking away the Detroit Smash." For the next several minutes, the match became a desperate struggle for survival. Monoma was relentless, viciously and methodically attacking the injured shoulder. He slammed it into the turnbuckle, stomped on it, and locked Izuku in a painful armbar that nearly forced a submission. Izuku's face was a mask of agony, but he refused to quit. He could hear the crowd chanting his name, willing him to fight on, and he fed off their energy, managing to crawl to the ropes to break the hold. He was in serious trouble. His primary finishing move was gone. His arm felt like a useless appendage, a dead weight of searing pain. Monoma, smelling blood in the water, grew cockier than ever. "It's over, champion!" he sneered, pulling a dazed Izuku to his feet. "You're a one-trick pony, and I've broken your trick. Now let me show you how a real A-lister does it." In the ultimate act of mockery, Monoma hoisted Izuku onto his own shoulders, setting up for a stolen Detroit Smash. The crowd booed vociferously. But Monoma had made a fatal error. He had been so focused on the arm, he had forgotten about the legs. He had forgotten about the brain. As Monoma held him, ready to deliver the final blow, Izuku, running on pure instinct and adrenaline, threw his head back, smashing it into Monoma's nose with a sickening crack. A classic, desperate headbutt. Monoma howled in pain, his grip loosening as he staggered back, clutching his face. Izuku dropped to his feet, but he didn't stop. He didn't pause to recover. He saw the opening. The one he had been waiting for. Monoma, dazed and blinded by pain, turned around, right into the path of a charging Izuku. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a power bomb. It was a foot crack, a Delaware smash. A super kick, delivered with such speed and precision that no one saw it coming. It connected flush on Monoma's jaw. The sound echoed through the arena. Monoma's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the mat like a puppet with its strings cut. Without hesitation, Izuku hooked the leg. The referee dove to the mat. 1. 2, 3, the bell rang, and the arena erupted. Iizuka had done it. He didn't jump up and celebrate. He couldn't. He rolled off Monoma, clutching his throbbing shoulder, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The victory had been brutal. It had been ugly. It had taken everything he had. But it was a victory. The referee brought him the championship belt and helped him to his feet. He strapped it around Iizuka's waist, the familiar weight both a comfort and a burden. He raised Iizuka's good arm in the air. As his music filled the arena and the fans chanted his name, Iizuka stood in the center of the ring. He looked down at the gold plate at his waist. Bakugo's words echoed in his mind, paper champion. But he had just survived. He had won. He had defended his title. He looked out at the cheering crowd, at the thousands of people who believed in him. He thought of Ochiko's advice. And for the first time, a genuine, unburdened smile spread across his face. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a dream. This was real. The championship belt still felt heavy. It would always be heavy. But as he stood there, victorious, under the bright lights of Monday Night Raw, it felt a little less like a weight designed to crush him, and a little more like a shield he was finally learning how to carry. The week had been a crucible. Every day was a gauntlet of media appearances, grueling gym sessions, and long, anxious nights spent staring at the ceiling, the weight of the championship a physical presence in the otherwise empty hotel room. Iizuka felt like he was living in a pressure cooker, the heat and intensity ratcheting up with every passing hour. The world of a WWE champion, he was discovering, was a relentless, sleepless vortex. Tonight the vortex was pulling him back to the center of the storm, the ring of Monday Night Raw. The air in the arena was electric, thick with a tension that was almost suffocating. The entire show had been built around a single segment. There were other matches, other stories unfolding, but everyone in the building, from the fans in the cheap seats to the technicians in the production truck, knew that they were all just an overture for the main event. Not a match, but something far more volatile, the official contract signing for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship match at the upcoming pay-per-view. Ground Zero, Deku vs. Dynamite. The symbol of hope versus the avatar of victory. It was a story the company had been salivating over for years, and now it was here. Iizuka stood backstage, rolling his good shoulder, trying to work out the phantom aches that came with nerves. He was in his street clothes again, a clean, dark green hoodie and black jeans, but the championship belt was slung over his shoulder, its familiar weight a source of both comfort and anxiety. He could hear the low thrum of the crowd, a beast waiting to be fed. A hand, large and bony, landed on his shoulder. He looked up into the sunken, shadowed eyes of Toshinori Yagi. All Might was dressed in his immaculate general manager's suit, a crisp navy blue tonight, but his expression was anything but placid. He looked more gaunt than usual, the lines of worry etched deep around his mouth. "Are you ready for this, my boy?" All Might asked, his voice a low rumble. "I have to be," Iizuka replied, his own voice steadier than he felt. "Remember what we talked about?" All Might continued, his grip tightening slightly. "He will try to provoke you. He will throw everything he can at you. Insults, lies, personal attacks. It is his greatest weapon. Do not let him dictate the terms of the engagement. You are the champion. You hold the high ground. Do not let him drag you down into the mud with him. Stay calm. Stay professional. Be the symbol they need you to be." Iizuka nodded, taking a deep breath. "I will. I won't let him get to me." All Might stared at him for a long moment, then a sad, knowing smile touched his thin lips. "That is what every fighter says before the bell rings. Just be careful." He gave Iizuka's shoulder a final squeeze and then walked off toward the gorilla position, his long strides purposeful. He was going out first, to officiate. Iizuka was left alone with his thoughts, and the distant roar of the crowd. "Don't let him get to you." It sounded so simple. But this wasn't just any opponent. This was Kaken. For his entire life, Kaken had been the one person with a guaranteed, all-access pass to the deepest, most vulnerable parts of his psyche. Moments later, All Might's music hit, a stately, heroic theme that still sent shivers down Iizuka's spine. The crowd gave him a respectful, powerful ovation. On the monitor, Izuku watched as his mentor walked to the ring, where a long table draped in black cloth and 2 leather chairs were already set up. A single, official-looking contract folder sat in the center. All Might stood behind the table, letting the applause die down before speaking, his voice resonating with the authority of a living legend. "In 2 weeks, at the Ground Zero pay-per-view," he announced, his voice echoing through the arena. "A new chapter will be written in the history of this championship. A story of 2 young men who have grown up in each other's shadows, whose destinies have been intertwined since birth. A story of fire and heart. Tonight, we make that main event official." He gestured to the entrance ramp. "Please welcome first, the challenger, from Mizutafu, Japan, Katsuki Dynamite Bakugo." The arena lights bled to orange and black. An ear-splittingly loud series of explosions erupted from the stage, making the camera shake. Through the smoke and fire, Bakugo emerged. He wasn't just walking. He was swaggering, his shoulders rolling with an arrogance that was so profound it was almost an art form. He wore a designer leather jacket with an explosive motif on the back, unzipped to reveal a plain black t-shirt that did little to hide his powerful physique. He smirked at the chorus of boos, drinking them in like fine wine. He sauntered down the ramp, ignoring the fans, his crimson eyes fixed on the ring, on the table, on All Might. He looked like a predator who had just been told dinner was served. He slid into the ring, never taking his eyes off All Might, a flicker of disrespect in his gaze. He walked over to the table and slumped into one of the chairs, kicking his feet up onto the table's surface, right next to the contract. An act of pure, blatant contempt. "And now," All Might continued, his jaw tight with barely concealed annoyance. "His opponent. He is the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, Deku Izuku Midoriya." Izuku's upbeat, heroic music filled the arena, and the boos for Bakugo were instantly swallowed by a tidal wave of cheers. Izuku walked out onto the ramp, a determined look on his face. He made his way down, slapping hands with the fans, his eyes locked on the figure lounging in the chair in the ring. He was trying to project confidence, to project the aura of a champion. He entered the ring and stood opposite Bakugo, the table between them feeling like a flimsy barrier in no man's land. He took his seat, placing the championship on the table in front of him, a golden line drawn in the sand. "Now that both competitors are here," All Might said, opening the folder, "it is time to sign the contract for the main event of Ground Zero." Bakugo scoffed, a loud, dismissive sound. "What a waste of time. I don't need to sign a piece of paper. That belt is coming to me. It's an inevitability. This is all just useless corporate theater for the extras." He gestured dismissively at the roaring crowd. "It is a formality, young Bakugo," All Might said, his tone icy. "One that you will observe. Champion first." He slid the contract over to Izuku. Izuku picked up the pen, his hand steady. He looked across the table at Bakugo, whose face was a mask of bored contempt. Taking a breath, Izuku signed his name with a firm, clear stroke. "Izuku Midoriya." He slid the contract back to the center. All Might pushed it toward Bakugo. Bakugo stared at it for a long moment, then chuckled. It was a low, ugly sound. "You know, Deku," he began, ignoring the contract and leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "I was watching your pathetic little victory speech last week. This is our belt." He mocked Izuku's emotional tone. "You really are a piece of work." Izuku said nothing, his jaw clenched. "Don't let him get to you. I bet your mom was watching at home, wasn't she?" Bakugo's voice turned syrupy sweet, a venomous parody of kindness. "Probably crying her eyes out." "Oh, my poor, useless Izuku finally did something. She's always been your biggest cheerleader, hasn't she? Crying when you got hurt, crying when you were happy. Always crying." Izuku's knuckles turned white where he gripped the edge of the table. "Leave my mother out of this, Kaken." "Why?" Bakugo's smirk widened. "It's part of your whole pathetic story, isn't it? The weak-willed mother and her crybaby son, dreaming impossible dreams together. It's a touching story. Almost makes me want to puke." "Sign the contract, Bakugo." All Might's voice was a low warning. Bakugo ignored him, his eyes still locked on Izuku. "And then there's him," he said, hooking a thumb toward All Might without even looking at him. "The great All Might. He saw you, a quirkless, worthless nobody, and decided to make you his little pet project. Gave you everything. Paved your way right to the top. You didn't earn a damn thing. You're a charity case, Deku. You're his final, desperate attempt to feel relevant again. Everything I have, I fought for. Izuku shot back, his voice rising, the carefully constructed walls of his composure beginning to crack. You know what I went through. You were there. I was there. Bakugo agreed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. And I saw a pebble trying to be a mountain. You've got this shiny belt, but underneath it all, you're still the same useless Deku you've always been. A fraud. A pretender. And at ground zero, I'm going to expose you. Enough! All Might's voice boomed, shaking the ring. Sign the contract. Now. Bakugo finally broke his gaze from Izuku and looked up at All Might. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. This was what he had been waiting for. You know, for a second there, I almost forgot you were here, old man. Bakugo sneered, leaning back in his chair. Still trying to play the hero, huh? It's sad, really. Look at you. His eyes raked over All Might's skeletal frame. A washed-up has-been. A broken-down shell of what you used to be. You were the symbol of peace once, right? Now you're just a corporate suit, living vicariously through this pathetic kid because you're too weak and broken to do it yourself anymore. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a primal, protective instinct. An eruption of pure, unadulterated rage. All Might was sacred ground. He was the man who had saved him, who had believed in him, who had given him a life he could never have dreamed of. To hear him disrespected, to see him hurt by Bakugo's callous cruelty, it was a line that could not be crossed. Don't let him get to you. The advice evaporated in a flash of white-hot fury. Shut up! Izuku whispered, his voice dangerously low. Bakugo's smirk widened. What's that, Deku? Did I touch a nerve? I said. Shut up! With a guttural roar that came from the very depths of his soul, Izuku lunged forward. But he didn't go over the table. He went through it. He flipped the heavy table with a single, explosive movement. It flew into the air, contract, pens, and all, and crashed down in a heap. The crowd gasped, then roared. This was not part of the show. This was real. Bakugo, shocked for a split second by the sudden violence, barely had time to react before Izuku was on him. Izuku tackled him, knocking his chair over, and the two of them went down in a tangled mess of flailing limbs and furious shouts. Izuku wasn't throwing technical punches. He was just swinging, trying to inflict as much damage as possible. He connected with a wild right to Bakugo's jaw. Bakugo answered with a hard elbow to Izuku's ribs. All Might, his face a mask of horror and regret, shouted for security. Get them apart! Get them apart now! A flood of black-shirt security guards and WWE officials poured into the ring. It took 4 of them to haul a snarling, furious Izuku off of Bakugo. It took another 4 to restrain Bakugo, who was laughing, a wild, manic glint in his eyes. He had won. He had broken the champion. There he is! Bakugo yelled, pointing a triumphant finger at Izuku as the guards held him back. There's the real Deku! Not a champion! Not a symbol, just a pathetic, emotional crybaby who can't control himself. Izuku thrashed against the arms holding him, his face contorted in rage, trying desperately to get at Bakugo. Their eyes locked across the ruined landscape of the contract signing. There was no sport in their gaze, no professionalism. There was only pure, unadulterated hatred. The image broadcast across the world was one of utter chaos. The champion, his composure shattered, being dragged away like a common brawler, while his challenger laughed in triumph. The fuse had been lit. The explosion was now inevitable. High up in the stands, nestled in a corporate suite with tinted windows, a man in a simple but impeccably tailored black suit watched the chaos in the ring with an unnerving calm. He held a phone to his ear, his back to the glass, the screen of the suite's television reflecting in his polished dress shoes. His face was obscured by a swirling mist of purple-black energy, a bizarre, localized fog that made his features impossible to discern. This was Kurojiri. The contract signing has escalated, Kurojiri reported, his voice a smooth, placid baritone that betrayed no emotion. He watched as security finally managed to drag both competitors out of the ring and up the ramp in opposite directions. The voice on the other end of the line was inaudible to anyone else, but Kurohige listened intently. "Yes, master," he replied. "The animosity is quite genuine. It is potent." He turned and looked through the tinted glass, his gaze sweeping over the thousands of screaming fans. He wasn't looking at them as people. He was looking at them as assets, as data points on a spreadsheet. "The passion here is remarkable," he continued, his tone analytical. "These people are not merely spectators, they are investors. They invest their time, their money, but most importantly, their emotions. They have bought into a narrative, a mythology. This company doesn't sell wrestling matches, master. It sells symbolism." He watched as the arena crew scrambled to clear the wreckage from the ring. "The boy Midoriya, he is the vessel for that symbolism. The symbol of hope, as they call him. His power is not in his technique, which is raw, but in his ability to make these people feel. He makes them believe in the impossible. A very marketable narrative." There was another pause as he listened. "And the other one?" Kurohige said, a hint of something like interest entering his voice. "Bakugo. He is the antithesis. He represents victory at any cost. Power as a virtue in itself. He doesn't ask for their belief, he demands their submission. The symbol of hope versus the avatar of victory, a fascinating dichotomy. And a highly profitable one." Kurohige turned his full attention back to the ring, where two new wrestlers were making their entrance for the next match, the crowd still buzzing from the brawl they had just witnessed. "Midoriya has the fire, it's true. A classic heroic spirit," Kurohige mused, more to himself than to his master. "But the other one? Bakugo, he is a star. A volatile, incandescent, supernova of a star. He has the potential to burn this entire enterprise down, or to become its new sun." He fell silent, listening to the final instructions from the other end of the line. "Understood, master," he said finally. "Continue observation. Assess the structural weaknesses. The foundations of this place are built on emotion, and emotion is a vulnerability we are uniquely equipped to exploit." He ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He remained by the window, a silent, misty specter watching the show unfold, a corporate raider scouting his next target not for its assets, but for its soul. It was the go-home show for Ground Zero. The final Monday Night Raw before the pay-per-view. The entire wrestling world was buzzing, replaying the chaotic end of last week's contract signing over and over. The animosity between Deku and Bakugo had reached a fever pitch, and All Might, in a desperate attempt to keep them from tearing each other apart before the main event, had decreed they were banned from being in the same building until Sunday. Of course, this was professional wrestling. And rules, especially ones involving mortal enemies, were made to be broken. The main event of the night was announced, a tag team match. On one side, the explosive duo of Katsuki Bakugo and his loyal, hard-hitting partner, Eijiro, Red Riot, Kirishima. On the other, the WWE champion himself, Iizuka Midoriya, and a partner of All Might's choosing, meant to keep the peace. Iizuka stood by the curtain, the championship belt around his waist, as he waited for his partner's music to hit. He was in his full green and black ring gear, his body humming with a nervous, pent-up energy. He hadn't spoken to Bakugo since the brawl. He didn't want to. He just wanted to get to Sunday. Then, the arena temperature seemed to drop by 20 degrees. A haunting, atmospheric music track filled the arena, a mix of melancholic piano and icy synth. On the stage, plumes of smoke erupted, but they were different from the usual pyro. Half were a fiery red, the other half a frigid blue-white. Through the mist walked Shoto Todoroki. The crowd gave a mixed, confused reaction. Todoroki was neither a beloved hero nor a hated villain. He was a tweener, an enigma who operated on his own code. His ring gear was a striking asymmetrical design, half fiery red, half icy blue. His face was a mask of cold indifference. He was the son of the legendary, controversial wrestler Endeavor, but he carried none of his father's fiery bravado. He was a technical prodigy, a cold, calculating wrestling machine. Todoroki walked down the ramp, his expression never changing. He entered the ring and waited in the corner, stretching his arms, not even acknowledging the crowd. He was here to do a job. Nothing more, Izuku sighed. This was All Might's idea of a peacekeeping partner. Still, he couldn't deny Todoroki's skill. He was one of the best pure wrestlers on the roster. Izuku's own music hit, and the crowd erupted, their loyalty to their champion unwavering. He made his way to the ring, his eyes scanning for his opponents. Bakugo and Kirishima were already there, bouncing on their feet, radiating aggressive energy. Kirishima gave him a nod of warrior's respect, but Bakugo's face was pure, undiluted contempt. The bell rang, and the match started with Deku and Bakugo, exactly as the crowd wanted. They exploded out of their corners, meeting in the middle of the ring like two freight trains. They didn't grapple, they just started throwing wild, heavy punches. It was a continuation of their brawl from last week, a pure, visceral fight. The referee tried to separate them, but they were a whirlwind of rage. Finally, Bakugo got the upper hand, tackling Izuku into his corner and tagging in Kirishima. Together, he and Kirishima worked Izuku over with powerful double-team moves, their chemistry seamless and brutal. Kirishima, with his powerhouse, brawling style, was the perfect battering ram to complement Bakugo's explosive offense. Izuku was in trouble early. He finally managed to create some separation with a desperate spinning kick and scrambled toward his corner. He lunged, his hand outstretched. Todoroki stood on the apron, his hand out, his face impassive. Izuku slapped his hand for the tag. Todoroki entered the ring, and the entire pace of the match changed. He moved with an eerie, frictionless grace. Kirishima charged him, but Todoroki sidestepped and trapped him in a complex series of submission holds, flowing from one to the next with breathtaking speed. He outgrappled Kirishima, then knocked Bakugo off the apron with a stiff, perfectly placed kick. He was a one-man wrecking crew, his offense a cold, calculated storm of fire and ice-themed moves. The match continued, a fascinating clash of styles. The raw, passionate brawling of Deku and the wild, explosive chemistry of Bakugo and Kirishima, contrasted with the cold, detached, technical brilliance of Todoroki. Izuku and Todoroki barely spoke. Their tags were clean and professional, but there was no camaraderie, no shared strategy. Eventually, the heels managed to isolate Izuku again, cutting the ring in half and working him over mercilessly. They targeted his ribs and his back, softening him up for ground zero. Izuku was fading fast, trying to fight his way out of their corner, but their assault was relentless. The crowd clapped and stomped, trying to will him back into the fight. He made one final, desperate push, shoving Kirishima away and diving across the ring. The hot tag! He slapped Todoroki's hand. Todoroki came in like a force of nature, taking down both Bakugo and Kirishima with a stunning display of offense. He hit Kirishima with a move he called Flash Freeze Heatwave, a combination of a burning chop and a snap suplex. He had the match won. He went for the pin, but Bakugo broke it up at the last second, and then, all hell broke loose. All four men were in the ring, the referee completely losing control. Todoroki and Kirishima battled in one corner, while Izuku and Bakugo renewed their personal war in the other. They traded heavy blows, their hatred for each other overriding any semblance of a wrestling match. Izuku, feeding off the energy of the crowd, started to get the upper hand. He ducked a wild swing from Bakugo and hit him with a series of lightning-fast kicks, backing him against the ropes. He was setting up for a big move, perhaps the Delaware Smash. But Bakugo was never one to play by the rules when he was losing. With the referee distracted by the fight in the other corner, Bakugo delivered a low blow, a mule kick between Izuku's legs. Izuku gasped and collapsed to his knees, the wind knocked out of him, his offense completely halted. The crowd roared in outrage. Bakugo just sneered. This wasn't enough. He needed to make a statement. He slid out of the ring and reached under the apron, his hands searching. The crowd knew what was coming. Todoroki, having dispatched Kirishima, saw what Bakugo was doing and started toward him, his face finally showing a flicker of emotion, disgust. But it was too late. Bakugo pulled out a steel chair. He slid back into the ring, the steel weapon held menacingly in his hands. The referee finally saw him and immediately called for the bell, disqualifying Bakugo's team. But Bakugo didn't care. The match was over. The message was about to be sent. Todoroki stood in his path, shaking his head slightly, a silent warning. Bakugo just barked a laugh. "Get out of my way, icy hot!" He feinted at Todoroki with the chair, causing him to flinch back, and then he turned his attention to his true target. Izuku was still on his knees, trying to recover. Whack! The sound of steel connecting with flesh and bone was sickening. Bakugo didn't swing for the head. That was a line even he wouldn't cross outside a designated no-DQ match. He swung the chair hard into Izuku's ribs, right where he and Kirishima had been working on him all match. Izuku cried out and crumpled to the mat, curling into a ball. The arena was filled with a deafening chorus of boos. Bakugo stood over Izuku's prone form, the chair still in his hand, his chest heaving. He threw the chair down, the metal clattering on the canvas. But he wasn't done. He stalked over to the timekeeper's area and ripped the WWE Championship from the official's hands. He stormed back into the ring, standing directly over the fallen champion. He looked down at Izuku, a look of ultimate triumph and contempt on his face. Then, he raised the championship belt high above his head, the gold catching the bright arena lights. The final image broadcast before Raw went off the air was not of the champion. It was of the challenger, standing victorious over his broken rival, holding the prize he believed was already his. It was a declaration. At Ground Zero, there would be no rules, no partners, no honor. There would only be destruction. The air in the Yokohama arena was not breathable. It was a thick, volatile cocktail of anticipation, electricity, and the lingering, sulphurous scent of pyrotechnics. It was a solid thing, a physical entity that pressed in on all sides, vibrating with the roar of 30,000 souls who had gathered to witness a war. The event was named Ground Zero, a moniker that was both a threat and a promise, a nod to the explosive epicenter of a rivalry that had finally reached its detonation point. This was the main event. The massive screens above the ring, collectively known as the Titantron, went dark, and the deafening noise of the arena died to an expectant, almost holy silence. A single, ominous bass note rumbled through the subwoofers, a sound that felt less heard and more felt, a tremor in the bone. The screen flickered to life. The video package began. It started with a shaky, home video-style clip of a tiny, green-haired boy with wide, teary eyes, watching a wrestling match on a small TV. Then, it cut to a clip of a young, blonde-haired boy with a confident smirk, effortlessly winning a junior wrestling tournament. The images flashed faster. Deku, crying after being told he'd never make it. Bakugo, standing on a podium, his expression one of bored superiority. Deku, training in the WWE Performance Center, his body bruised but his eyes determined. Bakugo, making a dominant, explosive debut on Raw. The narrative accelerated. Deku's shocking, tear-filled championship victory. Bakugo's furious interruption of the press conference. "You're a fraud!" The table flip at the contract signing, a moment of pure, chaotic rage. And finally, the brutal image from the go-home show, Bakugo standing over Deku's crumpled form, a steel chair discarded on the mat, holding the WWE Championship high as the broadcast faded to black. The final shot of the package was a split screen, on the left, Deku's earnest, determined face. On the right, Bakugo's snarling, contemptuous sneer. The words, Ground Zero, slammed onto the screen between them, and the silence in the arena was shattered. The first notes of a harsh, industrial metal track blared through the PA system, a cacophony of distorted guitars and punishing drums. The stage exploded, not with streamers or confetti, but with a series of concussive, fiery blasts that shot pillars of orange and red flame 50 feet into the air. The heat washed over the first 20 rows. Through the inferno, Katsuki, Dynamite Bakugo emerged. He walked with an animalistic swagger, a predator in his natural habitat. He wore a magnificent, custom-made entrance jacket, black with jagged orange patterns that resembled crackling energy. The word, Dynamite, emblazoned on the back in stark, aggressive lettering. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He sneered, his crimson eyes scanning the crowd with utter disdain, as if their very presence was an insult. The boos were a physical wall of sound, a tidal wave of hatred that he seemed to relish, absorbing it and turning it into fuel. "Behold the avatar of victory!" President Mick's voice crackled with energy. trying to rise above the din. Katsuki Bakugo believes he is not just the challenger. He believes he is the rightful king coming to reclaim a stolen throne. He's a walking powder keg. Shota Aizawa's tired voice added. And tonight, he's looking to burn the entire kingdom down to get what he wants. There's no strategy here, just destruction. Bakugo reached the ring and slid under the top rope with a vicious, sudden movement. He marched to the center of the mat and threw his head back, letting out a primal, guttural roar that was picked up by the overhead microphones, a challenge to his opponent, to the fans, to the world. The industrial music cut out. The lights went down again, plunging the arena into darkness, save for the faint glow of thousands of cell phones. Then, a single, hopeful piano chord echoed through the silence. It was joined by another, and then a swelling orchestra. The opening notes of Deku's theme song. The Titantron lit up, not with explosions, but with a montage of fan-shot videos, children in Deku masks, teenagers holding up plus ultra signs, entire families cheering at a live event. It was a visual representation of the one for all fanbase. The stage bathed in a gentle, heroic green light. Izuku Midoriya appeared. The championship belt was fastened securely around his waist, the gold plate gleaming. He was in his signature green and black gear, but his face was different tonight. The usual wide-eyed anxiety was gone, replaced by a sharp, almost terrifying focus. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, but tonight, he was choosing to stand up straight beneath it. The roar from the crowd was transcendent. It wasn't just a cheer, it was a prayer. It was 30,000 people pouring their belief into one man. He walked down the ramp, his expression grim but resolute. He didn't slap hands. He didn't smile. He just walked, his eyes fixed on the man waiting for him in the ring, the source of his lifelong torment and his ultimate trial. And here comes the champion. Mick's voice was filled with emotion. The symbol of hope. A man carrying the dreams of so many on his shoulders. Can his heart withstand the inferno that awaits him in that ring? Heart doesn't block a lariat. Aizawa grumbled, but there was a sliver of something that wasn't quite cynicism in his tone. He looks different tonight. Focused. This isn't the starstruck rookie anymore. He knows what's at stake. Izuku entered the ring. He went straight to his corner, never breaking eye contact with Bakugo. The referee, a senior official chosen for this high-stakes encounter, stood between them. The ring announcer, her voice resonating with importance, began the formal introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, the following contest is the main event of the evening, and it is for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. The crowd roared. Introducing first, the challenger. From Mizurufu, Japan, weighing in at 203 pounds, he is Dynamite. Katsuki Bakugo. A fresh wave of boos crashed down, which Bakugo met with a derisive smirk, cracking his neck. And his opponent. From Mizurufu, Japan, weighing in at 185 pounds, he is the reigning, defending WWE World Heavyweight Champion. DKU. Izuku Midoriya. The ovation was deafening. Izuku's expression didn't change. The referee motioned for him to hand over the belt. Izuku took a deep breath, unfastened the championship, and passed it to the official. He held it high, showing it to each side of the arena, the ultimate prize. The camera zoomed in on Bakugo's face, his eyes fixated on the gold with a hungry, predatory intensity. He wanted it. He needed it. The referee handed the belt to the timekeeper, and then stood between the two men one last time, giving them his final instructions. They ignored him, their eyes locked on each other, a silent conversation of pure animosity passing between them. The referee stepped back and signaled for the bell. Ding! 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 The match began. And it began with an explosion. There was no feeling out process, no cautious circling. The bell was still echoing when Bakugo shot across the ring like a missile launched from a catapult. He didn't go for a grapple. He went for a kill shot, a massive lariat aimed at Izuku's head. Izuku, anticipating the immediate onslaught, ducked under it. He came up behind Bakugo, attempting a quick roll-up for a surprise pin. It was a classic underdog tactic. But Bakugo was too strong, too grounded. He simply planted his feet, blocking the roll-up, and then drove a vicious elbow back into Izuku's face. The impact was brutal. Izuku staggered back, dazed. Bakugo didn't give him a second to recover. He swarmed him, a furious torrent of offense, stiff kicks to the ribs. The same ribs he had brutalized with the steel chair, made Izuku gasp for air. Heavy, clubbing forearms to the back. He grabbed Izuku by the hair and slammed his face into the top turnbuckle, again and again, the sickening thud echoing through the arena. "This is what I predicted!" President Mike yelled. "Bakugo is all over him. He's not giving the champion a single second to breathe." Bakugo dragged Izuku out of the corner and threw him across the ring with a powerful heel throw. Izuku landed hard, his body skipping across the canvas. Bakugo stood over him, a cruel sneer on his face. "Get up, Deku!" he roared. "Show them all what a great champion you are. Show them what a hero looks like." This was the dynamic of their childhood, magnified under the brightest lights. Bakugo, the overwhelmingly powerful force of nature. Izuku, the one who could do nothing but endure. He pushed himself up, his body already screaming in protest, and was immediately met with a hard stomp to the chest that drove the air from his lungs. For 5 solid minutes, it was a methodical, brutal dissection. Bakugo was not just trying to win, he was trying to humiliate Izuku. He was punishing him for the audacity of being champion. He countered every attempt Izuku made at offense with overwhelming power. When Izuku tried for a dropkick, Bakugo simply caught his legs and swung him into the ropes. When Izuku tried for a flurry of strikes, Bakugo walked right through them and flattened him with a single, devastating forearm smash. "Bakugo is wrestling a perfect match," Aizawa noted grimly. "He's using his power to control the pace and his aggression to break Midoriya's spirit. The champion is on the verge of being completely shut out." Bakugo locked Izuku in a grueling Boston crab, arching his back, putting immense pressure on his spine and ribs. Izuku's face was contorted in agony. He was in the center of the ring, miles away from the ropes. His hands scrabbled at the canvas, his knuckles turning white. The referee leaned in, his hand raised, asking if he wanted to submit. The crowd was screaming, a desperate roar of encouragement. "Don't you dare quit, you useless nerd!" A voice echoed in Izuku's mind. It wasn't Bakugo in the ring. It was the voice of a 10-year-old Bakugo, standing over him in a playground, his hands sparking. The memory, the lifelong sting of that condescension, ignited a spark in him. He would not quit. Not to him. Never. With a primal scream that was half pain and half defiance, Izuku used his upper body strength to push himself up off the mat, then powered forward, crawling, dragging Bakugo's weight with him. It was an impossible feat of strength and will. Inch by agonizing inch, he dragged himself across the canvas until his outstretched fingers finally brushed against the bottom rope. The hold was broken. The crowd exploded in a mixture of relief and disbelief. Bakugo, furious that his hold had been broken by sheer stubbornness, stomped on Izuku's back before the referee could pull him away. He was yelling, his face red with rage, but as he turned away, he was breathing heavily. The effort of his opening assault, of holding that submission, had cost him. It was the first sign of a crack in his armor. Izuku saw it. Lying on the apron, gasping for air, he saw the slight heave of Bakugo's chest. He had survived the storm. Now, it was his turn to fight back. He used the ropes to pull himself up. Bakugo, seeing him rise, charged again. But this time, Izuku was ready. As Bakugo neared the ropes, Izuku grabbed the top rope and pulled it down. Bakugo, caught by surprise, tumbled over the top and crashed to the floor outside. It was the first real opening Izuku had. He didn't waste it. He took 2 steps back, then launched himself over the top rope in a spectacular, twisting corkscrew plancha, crashing down onto Bakugo on the outside. The crowd went ballistic. It was a high-risk move, one that hurt him as much as it hurt his opponent, but it was a statement. He was still in this fight. Both men were down. The referee began his 10 count. At the count of 6 they stirred. They rose to their knees, face to face on the padded floor, and just started trading blows. Raw, exhausted, desperate punches. Izuku's technical precision against Bakugo's brute force. They fought their way back to their feet, still swinging, and staggered back into the ring just as the count reached 9. The match had entered its second act. It was no longer a one-sided beatdown. It was a war of attrition. They traded momentum. Izuku, using his speed and agility, hit a series of his signature moves. A spinning heel kick that caught Bakugo on the temple, a picture-perfect Hurricane Rana that sent Bakugo flying across the ring. He was finally able to build some momentum, but he couldn't put the challenger away. Bakugo would always cut him off with a display of raw power. A devastating spinebuster that nearly broke Izuku in half. An explosive German suplex that sent him flying. He hit his AP shot, a rapid-fire flurry of strikes, cornering Izuku and pummeling him until the champion collapsed. But Izuku would not stay down. The crowd was living and dying with every single blow. They chanted, "DKU!" when he was in trouble and roared with every comeback. They screamed, "BKUGO sucks!" every time he landed a cheap shot or taunted the crowd. The first major near fall came after Bakugo countered a charge from Izuku with a brutal tilt-a-whirl backbreaker, dropping him right on his knee. He then dragged Izuku up and executed a flawless, high-impact exploder suplex. He hooked the leg. "This could be it!" Mike screamed. 1, 2. Izuku's shoulder shot up off the mat just a fraction of a second before the 3. The arena erupted. Bakugo looked at the referee in disbelief, his eyes wide with fury. He got in the ref's face, screaming that it was 3. But the call stood. He turned back to Izuku, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Why won't you just die?" he screamed, a moment of genuine, raw frustration breaking through his arrogant facade. He dragged Izuku's limp body toward the corner. He was going for the kill. He was going for his ultimate finisher. He climbed to the top rope, his back to the ring. He steadied himself, glanced down at the fallen champion, and then launched himself into the air for the howitzer impact, a devastating top rope diving splash that had ended dozens of matches. But in midair, Bakugo saw it. Izuku was moving. Izuku rolled, a desperate, instinctual movement, out of the way. Bakugo crashed into the canvas with a sickening thud, the impact of his own move rattling his entire body. This was Izuku's chance. He staggered to his feet, his body screaming, and saw Bakugo pushing himself onto all fours, dazed. He knew this was his moment. He had to hit a finisher, but his ribs were on fire, his back was a wreck. He couldn't lift him for the Detroit Smash, so he went for the next best thing. He backed into the opposite corner, stomping his foot on the mat, the crowd stomping along with him, building the energy. Bakugo slowly, groggily, rose to his feet. He turned around. Crack! A Delaware Smash. A super kick, delivered with every last ounce of strength Izuku had left. It connected perfectly, right under Bakugo's chin. The sweat flew from Bakugo's head in a halo. His eyes glazed over. He was out on his feet before he even started to fall. He collapsed to the mat. Izuku fell on top of him, hooking the leg, his body a dead weight. This had to be it. 1, 2. The entire arena held its breath. Kick out! At 2.99 seconds, Bakugo's shoulder ripped itself off the canvas with a violent, impossible surge of pure will. The arena didn't cheer or boo. It let out a collective, disbelieving gasp, followed by a roar of astonishment. No one had ever kicked out of a clean Delaware Smash from Deku. No one. Izuku stared down at his hand, then at Bakugo's stirring form, his face a mask of utter shock. He had hit him with his best shot, and it wasn't enough. For the first time, a flicker of despair crossed his face. What more could he possibly do? Bakugo was pushing himself up, a thin trickle of blood coming from his lip. He was smiling. A wild, broken, terrifying smile. He had taken the champion's best shot, and he was still alive. He had been to the brink and back, and it had only made him stronger. "Is that all you've got, Deku?" he spat, blood flying from his lips. "Is that all the great champion has?" They were both on their knees in the center of the ring, utterly spent. The match had devolved into something primal. They just started trading forearms, each blow weaker than the last, but filled with a decade of hatred and resentment. It was ugly. It was desperate. It was beautiful. They fought their way back to their feet, using each other for balance, still trading blows. Bakugo grabbed Izuku's head. Izuku grabbed his. They stood forehead to forehead, screaming at each other, words lost in the roar of the crowd, as they continued to exchange weak, slapping strikes. Then, Bakugo found one last reserve of strength. He shoved Izuku back, then hit a second exploder suplex. But he held on. He pulled Izuku back to his feet and hit a third. He was setting up a combination to finally end it. He dragged Izuku toward the corner one more time. He was going for it again. The howitzer impact. The move that had just failed him, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that he could make it work this time, was astounding. "This is illogical." Aizawa's voice was strained, caught up in the drama. "He's going to the well one too many times. Hubris will be his downfall." Bakugo climbed the ropes. He looked down at Izuku's broken form, lying in the drop zone. This time, there would be no escape. But as he stood on the top rope, poised to fly, he saw something that made him pause. Izuku wasn't just lying there. His eyes were open. And they weren't dazed or unfocused. They were sharp. They were analytical. He was watching. He was learning. In that split second of hesitation, Izuku acted. He didn't roll away. He pushed himself up, staggered forward, and slammed into the ropes, shaking them violently. Bakugo, his balance already precarious, lost his footing. He flailed then fell, his legs getting tangled in the ropes. He crashed down, landing hard on the back of his head on the top turnbuckle, before slumping to the mat, completely stunned. This was it. The real opening. The one born not of luck or instinct, but of pure strategy. The analysis from his notebook, the years of study, had paid off. He had goaded Bakugo into his most predictable pattern, and created his own opportunity. Izuku's body was broken, but his spirit was soaring. Adrenaline, pure and potent, flooded his system. He saw Bakugo stumbling to his feet, his senses completely scrambled from the impact. The crowd was on its feet, a single, 30,000-person entity, screaming as one. They knew what was coming. Izuku seized Bakugo. He didn't have the strength to lift him for a traditional power bomb. But he didn't need to. He hooked his arms, bent his knees, and with a final, desperate, plus-ultra roar that tore itself from his throat, he hoisted Bakugo onto his shoulders. The weight was immense. Every muscle screamed. But he held him. He held his rival, his tormentor, his ultimate challenge high above his head. For a single, iconic moment, he stood there, the champion, holding his destiny in his hands. And then he drove him down, the Detroit Smash. A devastating, sit-out power bomb, executed with perfect, final clarity. The impact shook the entire ring. It was an exclamation point. It was the end. Izuku collapsed on top of Bakugo, his arm draped over his chest. He didn't have the strength to hook the leg properly. He could only lie there, his face pressed against the mat. The referee dove down. 1. The sound was a cannon shot. 2. The world seemed to slow down, to hold its breath. 3. The bell rang. It was over. The explosion of sound from the crowd was absolute. It was a cathartic, emotional release. Izuku Midoriya was still the champion. He didn't move. For a full minute, he just lay there on the mat, his body and Bakugo's a tangled heap, the only movement the rise and fall of his heaving chest. The referee gently untangled him and raised his hand, but Izuku barely seemed to notice. He was in another world, a world of pure, painful, triumphant exhaustion. Finally, the referee helped him to his knees. He handed him the WWE Championship. Izuku took it, his hands trembling. He looked down at the gold, then across the ring. Bakugo was beginning to stir. Officials were helping him, trying to get him to his feet. He shoved them away, his pride still intact even in devastating defeat. He stood on shaky legs, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He had lost. Clean. In the center of the ring. There were no excuses. No flukes. No interference. He had been beaten. He glared at Izuku, his crimson eyes burning with a complex inferno of hatred, frustration, and something else, something new. He opened his mouth as if to scream, to curse, to deny the reality of the moment. But no sound came out. Instead, he held Izuku's gaze for a long, silent moment. And then it happened. It was almost imperceptible. A twitch of the head. A slight, sharp, downward jerk of his chin. It wasn't a nod of friendship. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a warrior's acknowledgement. A begrudging, infuriated, silent admission. Tonight, you were better. Then, the mask of fury slammed back into place. He turned, pushed through the officials, and limped out of the ring, disappearing up the ramp without a single look back. In the ring, Izuku watched him go. He finally, shakily, got to his feet. He held the championship belt high above his head, the confetti cannons erupting around him, showering him in green and silver. The tears were flowing freely now, mixing with the sweat and blood on his face. He had climbed the mountain and defeated the dragon that lived at the top. He had taken the best his lifelong rival had to offer and had emerged, broken but victorious. The weight of the gold on his shoulder was still immense. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt earned. It felt right. In the center of that ring, under the bright lights of Ground Zero, Izuku Deku Midoriya was not just a champion by victory. He was a champion by merit. He had truly, finally, earned his place.